that are also pertinent to the Southern African environment. And in presenting these sessions, we would like to welcome Dr. James Dalton. Before I present him to you, I would just like to remind you of 4 little rules for engagement during the sessions. And the first rule is to please keep your microphone mute during the presentation. If you have any comments, questions, or interventions on the topic of the presentations, please use the chat or the question box to share your intervention. And then during the pauses or at the end of the presentation, depending on the type of questions and interventions you have, we will pick them up and either allow you to speak or summarize them depending on the time allocation. You can use the question tool at any time to ask any questions to the group, whether it is a logistic issue or it is a content issue. When we're doing the Q&A session, if you'd like to make an intervention on the topic that is being discussed, please raise your hand and I will allow you to speak when at the first available moment so that you can make your intervention as well. So today, as I was saying, we have Dr. James Dalton presenting. Dr. James Dalton is working for a UCN. Sorry. James Dalton is working for a UCN. He's actually the head of the Global Water Program. He holds a doctorate in civil environmental engineering and has been working in different areas of the world on issues around water resource management, also working as an advisor for DFID, which is the UK International Development Agency, and prior to joining IUCN, working at the Pacific Islands Applied Geoscience Commission in the Fiji. In my world, we always say that those who work with waters and in tourism always get to the best places for working, and I think Dr. James Dalton can definitely verify that assumption. So without much further ado, let me welcome Dr. Dalton today and sharing with us the case studies for transboundary water governance. James?
Great, thank you, Cara. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Great,
and you're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm glad that we've got so many people on the line. Is my screen clear?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Great. Great. Well, welcome everybody. We've got quite a lot to get through today, so I will be rattling through some slides, and hopefully people are online who've joined the previous sessions, and so they know exactly what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to, start with an overview of today. I'm going to give you an introduction to our program we called BRIDGE, which stands for Building River Dialogue and Governance, which is a culmination of the expertise that IUCN has learned over the last 20 years working on transboundary governance, but also culminates in practically applying that based on the previous seminars that you've joined on transboundary water governance. And then we'll talk about 3 case studies: the importance of multi-level governance in the Sixaola Basin, which is shared between Costa Rica and Panama, and building transboundary institutions to secure sustainable financing at scale. So that includes the Sixaola Basin, which is shared between Kenya and Uganda. And then a Nexus dialogue to support water governance, which focuses on the 3S basins, the Sekong, the Sisan, and the Swipok, which are major tributaries of the mighty Mekong River, shared between Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. The BRIDGE program vision and mission is quite straightforward, but has been tailored over the years. It focuses on the capacities of countries sharing river basins, and that actually includes not just rivers, but it includes all water systems, so groundwater and lakes, to implement, and you'll see underlined, effective water management arrangements. And the reason that we've underlined effective is that there are many water management arrangements out there, but whether or not they're effective or not is another concern, is another question. And actually arranging governance is one thing, but actually being able to mobilize and implement it is a far different and often complicated challenge. And the way to make it effective through shared visions, through benefit sharing principles to ensure that the allocation and sharing of a river basin is negotiated between the states involved and different stakeholders as well, not just states, and that it's transparent and coherent in terms of what those agreements are, and that the institutions are also transparent and clear so that stakeholders understand who's doing what and where to go to for information, where to support processes, etc. And the goal ultimately is to enhance cooperation amongst riparian countries by applying water diplomacy at multiple levels. And by multiple levels, we mean from community to cabinet, if that's the easiest way to explain it. From those people who actually live on the border in those shared basins or in the basin more broadly, to those states who negotiate agreements over the protection of that river basin or the allocation of water resources between states. So some quick facts on that program. It was launched in 2011. It works in 14 transboundary basins in Africa, Asia, and Central and South America. 2 of these basins are lake basins, Lake Titicaca and Lake Malawi, Nyasa, the LMNN basin, depending on which country you're from, Malawi, Tanzania, or Mozambique. The 14 basins that we work with and have done for some time now have a combined population of around 115 million people. We've been strongly supported by Swiss Development Corporation, partly because of their history in working with water, but also in terms of peaceful development. And it's received co-funding support from CEDA, the Swedish CEDA, OES, the US Department of State, the Global Environment Facility, the Asia Foundation, and others. And we implement it with a wide group of partners. There are just a few here: United Nations, European Commission, the Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, the IGAD Secretariat in the Horn of Africa, the Mekong River Commission, WaterNet in the SADC region, Agua Sustentable in South America, and many other partners. We certainly wouldn't be able to do this on our own. And we're currently in the phase of 2019 to 21 in this particular part of the overall bridge program. This is just a brief map demonstrating where bridge works in a variety of different basins, gives you an understanding over the different contexts that it has to work in, and therefore the different both geographic context, the climate contexts, and the ethnic diversity and different issues that are raised, given that many countries are in different states of development. The overall methodology, I say quite simple, but this has been built over many years. It focuses on local to global scales. So local being the promotion of local agreements for the sustainable management of water resources at the local basin level, nationally at ensuring that there's clarity over the rules of the game with respect to transboundary basins and transboundary watercourses, to understand that legally these systems are protected, that there are agreements, that there are institutions in place, and critically important that there are increasing finances available to support these mechanisms, and we'll come to that later on. And then regionally, for strengthening regional agreements, institutions more broadly on transboundary cooperation, and then at the global level, promoting global frameworks, not necessarily promoting conventions, but certainly supporting the application of conventions and helping countries understand what the signatory of a convention means in terms of its water resources. The approach, therefore, the goals are very much focused on cooperative and peaceful relationships between states and stakeholders, on maintaining the integrity of ecosystems to ensure that they are healthy and are able to provide the services that people gain from them, that human well-being and sustainable development is core to this function, that we have to focus on ensuring that people develop and grow and receive the benefits that they're looking for from living and working in shared basins, and that there is adaptive capacity created, in particular, to water-related hazards and to climate change, given this is a major driver in transboundary river basins. And there are various cogs in the wheel, which I think you've heard from previous webinars on water diplomacy, around our structure on dialogue, on consensus building, on agreements and policy and legal reforms, and strengthening institutional frameworks. And together, these different scales our experience tells us help promote effective water governance. And now, key lessons learned from this particular program, therefore, are from the last sort of three phases of bridge. The fourth phase we're in now, we're obviously working on that right now. COVID makes things slightly challenging, but also slightly interesting. And so these sort of lessons learned are the basis of the 3 case studies that I'm about to present to you. Key lessons, therefore, is that, you know, at this stage, multi-level and cross-sectoral dialogues tend to be the things that drive the greatest stakeholder cooperation and build trust between institutions and civil society. Keeping transboundary water governance just within water institutions doesn't actually lead to the optimal outcomes. So multi-level, different scales, and across sectors are really, really important to understand water resource management. That water resource agencies, management institutions, those that are involved in transboundary water governance need to be increasingly financially secure to really function effectively and sustainably. And a lot of the time, they're not. A lot of the time, as you'll find out from the first case study, these are voluntary processes. And that limits the ability of what countries can really do, and it limits the ability to maximize the opportunities that exist. And you'll find out a bit more about that in the third case study from the Mekong. And so there needs to be a greater focus on financial autonomy of the institutions and financial flows into transboundary river basins, because when they don't work very well, they become, the tensions increase between states, and this is where we can create a level of instability. And finally, effective governance requires this interaction between different scales and different sectors. And the Nexus assessments, water, energy, and food assessments, we're increasingly finding as a demonstrable tool that allows different stakeholders and sectors to come together, and therefore builds that trust and confidence ahead of dialogues to improve where benefits can be shared, where investment is required, and how stakeholders and states can cooperate better. So let's move on to the first case study, and I want to take you to the Sixaola Basin. You'll have to apologize that this graphic in front of you is in Spanish, but if you look in the top left, you can see my mouse. This here is the Sixaola Basin. Bridge has been working there since 2011, and it's a very diverse basin. It has a huge range of biodiversity and has 6 protected areas within it. It also has a large population, a diverse population, including Afro-Caribbeans, 6 indigenous territories that function as different buffer zones around protected areas. And it has about 33,000 people living in the basin. So not a huge population, but a diverse population. 19% of the basin is in Panama and 81% is in Costa Rica, which is to the north. So you see Costa Rica is the northern of the 2 countries, Panama the southern. Agriculture dominates this basin. Small-scale farming dominate the mid and upper levels of the basin, focused primarily on organic cocoa and plantains. And the lower half of the basin is much bigger in terms of monoculture plantations for plantain and banana, which are all run by multinational companies. And so those crops go for export. Relationships between Costa Rica and Panama have generally been peaceful and collaborative. There was a slight hiccup of armed conflict way back in 1921 over border demarcation, and this was settled with a border treaty in 1941. And it's important to come back to this point that the conflict was over border demarcation. This relationship, therefore, was reiterated in a cooperation for border development in 1992, ratified in 95 between the 2 countries. And the idea being that cooperation agreement is designed to improve and expand and deepen cooperative relations across the 2 countries, across a variety of sectors, to try and contribute to more broadly social, economic, commercial, environmental, political development, and to improve the health and status and economic stability of the border region between the 2 countries. So with that in as the context, the bridge program explains, the way that it interprets multi-level governance is through these 5 action chains, which are all designed to build upon each other and to strengthen cooperation. They're designed to build on existing institutions to mobilize multi-level governance. This is not about creating new mechanisms, but it's about building on what's there. It enables this consultative process, which allows for decisions across borders to be jointly owned, and therefore allows the decision to gain credibility and legitimacy when it's owned by more than one state and across different stakeholders. It facilitates that negotiation on benefit sharing between stakeholders, so they understand what they get from the river and therefore why it needs to be better managed. And it's about moving and channeling knowledge from local level upwards into informed national and transboundary policymaking. It comes back to the point I raised at the beginning about effective water management, that decisions made at the national level, often in the capital, may be quite different in operation, if at all implementable, in the far borders of the country where there are a whole range of other governance challenges happening and a variety of different stakeholders and interpretations of those national laws and agreements. And the idea being that this allows communities on the ground to motivate national governance frameworks and national decisions that have been made at the local level. And it also means, therefore, they can apply and try them and feed that information back up to the higher level at the national level and demonstrate how these things can work or how negotiation and adjustment might be required. In the Sixaola, in 2004, there was a regional strategy for sustainable development. This led to a project that was financed by the Global Environmental Facility and the Inter-American Development Bank between 2009-2013. And in that, they created something called the Sixaola Binational Commission. The commission became the apex body for strategic management of the project and therefore fell into a role by both governments agreeing that it could continue as a binational commission as a unit of territorial planning for the basin and management of the basin once this project finished in 2013. In 2012, a strategic alliance between the binational project, IUCN, and the secretariats of this agreement of border development consolidated this role of the binational commission and led to it being the sort of go-to apex agency for good governance and sustainable development of the basin. In 2011-2012, when the bridge program started in this basin, we made the strategic decision to support the binational commission institutionally. Let's not forget this was developed by a project, and therefore at the end of the project resourcing, this institution had no home, had no financing, and therefore it needed support to grow it and to work with it to understand the challenges it faced. We focused on analysing the legal and institutional context that it was operating in, looked to develop the operating regulations for the actual binational commission and a roadmap for the basin at large. And then there were various special working groups established between the countries led by the binational commission on agriculture and trade, strategic development guidance, health, environment, emergency management, infrastructure and tourism, to ensure an inclusion of a larger group of stakeholders in this process. And based on this, this sort of starting of this consultation, concrete actions for cooperation in the basin were identified and moved forward, including an official approval of the border delimitation process and the strategic alliance with the Central American Strategy for Rural Territorial Development. The reason why this border issue was so contentious, and going back to the previous clashes over borders between the two countries, is that when the river formed the border, when the river flooded, the river moved course, and therefore the border moved course. And certainly when I was in this basin, I remember meeting farmers who told me that they'd gone back to their field in the morning to tend their animals and look after their crops to find that the river had carved its channel through the middle of their land, and what land was still remaining was in the distance in the middle of the river as an island. And in going over there on a boat, they were met with farmers suddenly from Panama who said, "This is now our land." And this created, obviously, as you can imagine, tension between the communities, but it became obviously tension between countries. The Sixaola Basin, therefore, had a few challenges, and so the Binational Commission's role is to provide this platform for various actors to coordinate and develop actions which reduce these tensions and solve the problem over the border, which has been achieved, but to also conserve natural resources and biodiversity more broadly, to promote sustainable and diversified production, and to strengthen the institutional framework under the border agreement between the two countries. Interestingly enough, this has also led to improving domestic legislation on watershed management between the countries. But coordination is complex. Let's not forget that. It requires this diverse range of actors involved. There is now a Sixaola Assembly, which comprises 34 members, along with representatives of different projects that are happening in the basin at any one time. So it's a permanent assembly which allows members to come together and also to bring in projects that are working there to participate as observers over issues that the Binational Commission is raising. The Bridge project, therefore, focused on the practical training around integrated water resource management. Since then, has been working a lot with them on climate change implications, water governance, and water governance arrangements. And I think it's important to point out at this point that the Binational Commission members, especially the coordinating unit, are volunteers. Their functions are honorary, and so they have limited time and resources to really dedicate to this. But as the Commission becomes empowered and more stakeholders join that process, it takes on these ever-greater responsibilities, and awareness is raised at the national level in the two countries over its catalyzing role. And therefore, I think as an example, it demonstrates that how cooperation can both reduce tension, solve problems, but also in this case, helps create an institution, but the challenge is keeping that institution sustainable and how to make it into a more permanent role. This approach demonstrates very much at a bottom-up, top-down level in terms of two states talking to each other around the border, but also stakeholders in the basin facing some of these challenges themselves, but raising these issues further up the hierarchy of institutions. And so it's allowed the political decisions to be respected between the countries, but it's also, and therefore demonstrates the fundamental role of the state, but it's also important to demonstrate the role of local stakeholders to give feedback on those agreements and arrangements and policies that affect their immediate situations and the management of these shared watersheds. I will stop there and ask if there are any immediate questions.
Thank you, James, for this very interesting presentation of the Sixaola Basin. It reminds me a bit of what happens for us in the Chobe River between Namibia and Botswana, where we also had tensions over the years because the river was the border, and even without floods, just the presence of islands appearing and disappearing made the decision of where the land was quite interesting. But we've had an international resolution over it, so things are quite peaceful. There are no questions right now from the participants. Oh, but somebody has a raised hand. So Jethro, I'm going to unmute you. Can you please ask your question and your comment to James? Thank you, Jethro. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jethro Zuarime, the investor vendor. I like the issue of your categorization of the stakeholders from regional, national, and local. But my observation in some of these river basin management could be is that even at local level, the local communities or the stakeholders or those with a stake could be from national level, or even say, for instance, water for agriculture, water for industry and domestic, water for fishing and stuff like that. So I think it's quite interesting. I just want to check whether you have had a scenario like that and how such conflicts are managed? Because sometimes even, for instance, an area may be a national biosphere, might be demarcated as national biosphere, and the interest is also from the national level. So how do you, or have you ever had an experience of mediating such conflicts, because the interests are so diverse, and how to sustainably come up with a solution can be a challenge? Maybe can you share maybe your experience of such? Thank you.
Thank you, Jethro. James?
Sure. No, a great question, Jethro. I mean, so I think just to be clear then, so what you're saying is at the local level, you can have all of this complexity of conflicts between different water users, depending on how they engage with it, from fishers to agriculturists. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
Right, right. Yes, I mean, you're right. So I'm simplifying things a little bit here for these case studies, given the time. But there was certainly, if I take this example of the Sixaola, tensions between farmers who were big plantation farmers for banana to smaller scale people who were much smaller, cocoa farmers, to also farmers who in the middle of this were switching to organic production, who didn't want to use all of the chemicals because this was creating a pollution impact, but also there was a market for organic vegetables. So organic bananas, sorry. So yes, even in this particular case in the Sixaola, there was a lot of diverse opinions at the local level over what everybody wanted from the river system and how the relationship across the border was affecting that. It's very common. So in fact, each of these case studies could be on each of those different levels, community, national, regional, and global level, over the issues and implications of different decisions. In northern Nigeria, we worked many years ago in the Sixaola Basin, and that was dominated by lots of local conflicts due to decisions made over infrastructure from the 70s and a dam which had affected flows for 300 kilometers. And this created huge local tensions between farmers and pastoralists. And solving that is not easy, but I think my main experience with that is to give it time. Try not to rush stakeholders, especially on things which directly affect their lives, their livelihoods. These are critically important to understand and to take the time to understand so that you can then narrow it down to what are the really root cause of the problems, and from there then work with stakeholders so that they can identify solutions to the problems collaboratively together. That will be my main suggestion on that. In fact, the examples I've got here, one later on, the last one does also talk a little bit about some of the local level, but it's a very good point, and it's certainly not easy to solve, Jethro.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much, James and Jethro. I think, yeah, because you said there's more examples to come that might sort of also help to unpack these questions a bit more, which has to do both with government situations and the relationship between government and communities and land users and demarcations. So let's carry on maybe with the presentation a bit longer, James, and then we'll see what other come up. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'm now going to move to a subset called the Building Transboundary Institutions to Secure Sustainable Financing at Scale. This is very much an active, ongoing project for us, actually, and this focuses on the Sixaola Basin, which is shared between Kenya and Uganda. This basin has a population of 4 million people in it and 3 subcatchments: the Malaba-Malakisi, Umpologa, Goma, and the Kyogo, which flows into the Kyogo, and the Sio, which drains directly into Lake Victoria. Subsistence farming is the main economic activity in this basin, but it also has significant population pressure, and due to that, a degradation of land and water resources, which are very apparent and are also very well understood between both countries. To address these issues then, historically, there was, again, something that was initiated by the Global Environmental Facility, a river basin management project that was managed under the Nile Basin Initiative NELSAP framework to try and improve cooperation between these two riparian states. We actually joined working in this basin in around 2017, so 3 years ago. And we decided to focus on activities in the basin around two main priorities. One was finalizing the legal and institutional framework for cooperation in the basin, which was still hanging there as a draft process, but to also update the 2008 Sixaola Basin investment strategy, and to facilitate a process to prioritize investment projects between the states, as requested by both the government of Kenya and the government of Uganda. What we did to start with was review the benefits of this river basin that have been analysed in previous project documents. And in the past, this had looked at the benefits from cooperation and the benefits from the river basin without cooperation. So what cooperation exists there and what are the benefits from it, and how project development and interventions would help improve that. What this showed was that in the past, many projects and reviews did not really look at the broad implications of regional economic integration and the peace and security benefits that cooperating over this basin could bring. So we decided that the best way to do this was to look at a benefit, opportunities, and assessment dialogue, so a process of trying to understand what those benefits and opportunities were. And I think for those of you who've been on these webinars already, this follows the process, the benefit sharing approach that my colleagues Rebecca, Maria Laura, and Emilio shared in a webinar 2 weeks ago, I think. So the process of applying this methodology is not quick or easy. In a real basin context, beyond the sort of conceptual, it takes time, and therefore it's been ongoing through several stakeholder consultation exercises. The first consultative process in 2017 was really about understanding with stakeholders many of the things that this webinar series has been designed to do, is to raise attention and understanding on transboundary governance and the benefits of cooperation and benefit sharing, to develop a shared vision for the basin, and to understand much more and revisit those existing challenges and opportunities for joint basin management and development, and then to identify which are the stakeholders who have solutions and can operationalize to help mobilize those solutions, but also who benefits and who gains from those benefit sharing opportunities, so that we can look at what exactly can cooperation bring between the two countries. This led to a situation analysis on benefits, and it led from there to 3 further binational basin meetings and the development of a draft framework for promoting and guiding investments of transboundary significance, and ultimately an MOU between the countries on protecting the waters of the SMM. Now, this table demonstrates the investment projects of transboundary relevance. The projects on the left, starting with Malaba irrigation and going down. The budget for those projects, you'll see some are fairly small, some are quite large. The Angololo Dam, 44 million, for example, 82 million for the Bulusambu small multipurpose reservoir in Uganda. And then which country these projects are likely to benefit. Some are national, some will benefit both states. And then a rating given by stakeholders based on a workshop in May 2018 in Uganda. Stakeholders developed this list. They selected these 12 shortlisted investment projects from the broader range of them, looking at which ones had transboundary relevance. So even though the benefit is to one country, it still has a transboundary implication, for example, on flows or sediment movement. So we could understand, based on multi-criteria analysis, which of these projects could be agreed upon by stakeholders. And then using the benefit and opportunities assessment process, stakeholders then change these into 4 clusters of projects, which would qualitatively maximize the benefits across the stakeholder groups. So in this case, a cluster represents the best bundle of projects, which are the best diversity of projects that maximize benefits to the most diverse range of stakeholders. And they address a variety of different needs. They focus on infrastructure development, catchment restoration, livelihood enhancement, for example. Parallel to this benefit sharing process was separately something that we were working with the countries on to prepare an institutional framework for the investment framework. Where would this investment framework sit? Who would be responsible for it? Who would hold it? Who would make it happen? So that cooperation could work both from an investment perspective, but also to improve governance through the revision of the Sixaola Basin Memorandum of Understanding, which was prepared during the earlier GEF NELSAC project. So in many ways, what that earlier project did between 2008 and 2013 was kickstart a process between countries to negotiate and cooperate and address, identify, to understand the problems. But it didn't go far enough, partly because, again, of project-based financing, to actually move that into an implementation track. The joint working group was created as an interim body to follow up and review the existing memorandum of understanding between the countries, and to look at it in terms of how can the institutions support this investment framework. Their role as a joint working group between the states was to approve the basin investment framework, to assess the project proposals and prioritize them, to maintain a database of new projects coming in, to liaise with authorities and donors and others to look at funding opportunities, and ultimately to monitor and evaluate the process. And this is an ongoing live project right now. But in many ways, this was about maturing the project into a process of cooperation that is institutionally embedded in both countries. The framework supports the identification and preparation of those projects, but it also supports the prioritization and sequencing of future projects coming into the basin to understand what's really needed and how to mobilize finance for them. And this is to be implemented through an SMM investment plan, which is currently being developed. So there is an investment framework which determines what's needed, and the investment plan will then determine how to source that financing, who is able to finance those. And the memorandum of understanding creates that agreement between the countries. And I think what's important here is that those financial resources have also, in many ways, been identified by the countries themselves already. They've looked at contributions from public budgets and tax revenue. They're looking at contributions from users and beneficiaries from those projects in terms of tariffs or other mechanisms. They're looking, for example, water levies, water admin fees, abstraction charges, pollution charges, protection charges, and various other schemes that allow those benefiting from the system to pay for the system. And it also improves, therefore, licensing, the flow of data, and some of the fundamental basics of good water management between the countries. And also looking at contributions from external and corporate partners. So looking at the multilateral development banks, further financing, for example, from the GEF, possibly even the Green Climate Fund, but also looking into private sector as well. In Uganda, this part of the basin has a number of different private sector entities, brewers, bottlers, agricultural developers, and agricultural commodity suppliers, who also would benefit from these projects, but also contribute to water management, but also, sometimes also contribute to negative impacts of that as well. This project then, as something that's live, ongoing, is really at the cusp of where the challenges really lie for transboundary cooperation. If you think that this started back in 2008, and that there was a project designed to improve that collaboration between states, here we are in 2020, so we're 12 years later, and we have a much better understanding of the challenges and greater cooperation between the states, a better understanding over what those projects are that they want to do, which will benefit both of them, and clear stakeholder levels of engagement across the board. but we still hit that challenge of mobilizing finance for development in these complex basins, and that's a real challenge. And my next case study will put some more numbers to that to explain some of the other ways of looking at trying to mobilize finance. So I will stop there and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, James, for this other interesting case study. There is a question which revolves around financial mechanisms, but because you're going to talk about that just now, I think we should park it and hear your case study first and then maybe address it later. What do you think?
Okay. Well, okay, I'm happy for that. And unless you want to address it now, I don't mind.
Right, so this comes from Tendai, who is based in the Nkomati-Usuthu basin between South Africa and Mozambique. So it's another, and it's an international river basin. Tendai, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question on the financial mechanism. There you go, Tendai. You can.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Like you introduced, my name is Tendai, and I'm one of the senior managers for resource planning and operations in the Nkomati-Usuthu Catchment Management Agents. And we have got a shared basin, that is Nkomati Basin, and also the Maputo, the Usuthu side. So we are responsible, we share those basins. So normally we have got these basin setups which are being done. And one of the things that you raised it when you were presenting about the funding, that some of these things they are done as projects, but once the project is left and there's no funding, how do we keep these committees sustainable to make sure they continue to run? You know, it's an important question because it also applies even at a local level, nationally, and we've got agencies, water management agents that are established within the national you know, spheres. So those are the things I wanted to find out from your experience. How do you make sure that these which financial frameworks that needs to be put in place to ensure that they are sustainable? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tendai. That's a really great question. In fact, it's the killer question because there's no easy answer to it. It is one of the major challenges in that, and in fact, it's ongoing work that I know you in the ECE in Geneva is doing right now, and that we are doing as well on identifying appropriate transboundary finance mechanisms that can keep cooperation alive. And I think one of the things that it's very, very frustrating, I find, with water management is that we always have to justify the importance of water when, frankly, it's so starkly obvious that without water we cannot do very much else. So the idea of the benefit sharing approach is to really identify who really wins and who loses from benefit sharing river systems. And I think it often there's lots of assumptions around the benefits of water, but I think understanding exactly who benefits, who gains, and who loses from shared water is really, really key. It's only then that you can start to understand what are the critical economic elements in a basin that need water over everything else, that need to be prioritized. And normally that will be determined in hierarchies of policy, where energy tends to dominate because it's normally a national security issue. And then I think understanding food security and the benefits of water for food security and for domestic needs is critical. In fact, some might say that's a priority over energy, but energy obviously has a big multiplier effect economically for countries. But I think getting to understanding what those benefits are between countries is key to understand who's responsible for ensuring those benefits flow as both financial and non-financial benefits. So you know, flows for people to irrigate their crops, and sediment for delta stability, for example, to actually providing piped water supply where it exists, and using that to help make the case as to why there needs to be an understanding of the budget needs and allocate resources for transboundary water resource management, because when basins go into degradation, it's then that tensions tend to raise between countries, and you get this creeping level of insecurity happening between institutions across borders. Well, I have one example between Guatemala and Mexico, where Guatemala is upstream and feels that Mexico should be paying it for all of the water that flows downstream because it protects it and provides it to Mexico. Now, it doesn't do anything particularly special to manage that water resources. In fact, most of the governance of water resources there in that particular part of Guatemala is left to local communities. So I think fundamentally it's understanding the needs for people in the basin from a water resource perspective to explain why transboundary cooperation must continue. And right now we're looking into transboundary finance, both from a grant, non-grant, investment, private sector set of opportunities to understand what might work and what could work. But a lot of this does, I'm afraid to say, also fall down to the state. In 2018, the SDG 6 update report, which is a monitoring report for progress on the SDGs, showed that in many cases, whilst IWRM is improving in creating the policy framework for countries to manage water resources, what's not happening is the flow of water, of money out to the basins. So water is flowing, but unfortunately money is not, down to that principle of the basin management entities and that principle of subsidiarity which dominates integrated water resource management, where you manage resources at the basin level. So a lot of that is down to, unfortunately, national level and national treasury decision making. And this is where I think coming to them with solutions about what could be done can hopefully help them understand water resource management better in transboundary contexts. But it's not an easy question to answer. And the next case study has a couple of similar challenges as well. But I'll be happy to talk about this point later on as well.
Thank you, James. Tendai, have you a question been resolved for now?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, I appreciate
you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, James, you want to continue, and then we'll see, maybe we can pick up some more around these issues later.
Sure. So now I'm going to take us to the 3S basins, Sekong, Sisan, and Sripok basins, which are embedded within the broader mighty Mekong River basin. And this case study focuses on a Nexus dialogue to support water governance. And whilst that might not necessarily speak transboundary, just bear with me and it will hopefully become clearer. So whilst demands for water, energy and food are increasing, the natural resource base that we have is increasingly degraded and in scarce supply. And this is very, very clear in countries that are experiencing rapid economic growth, such as Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. Within these three countries, the Sisan, Sripok and Sisang, or the 3S river basins, are of special interest because from a nexus perspective of water, energy, food, they create and potentially reduce environmental trade-offs and we can develop solutions from understanding these for the benefit of the three countries. This is quite a sparsely populated region. It's often called the last frontier of development for Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. It's rich in natural resources, which the governments are all seeking to harness / exploit, if you like, to drive national development. And this sort of harnessing and opening up of this rural area has gone furthest in Vietnam, where there is large-scale state investment in agriculture, mining, hydropower, and transport into the central highland area of Vietnam since the early 1990s. And in Cambodia, investments in roads, hydropower, and land development started around about 20 years ago, and in Laos, much more recently, probably in the last 5 to 10 years maximum. So when we say nexus in this case, we mean, in a very simple form, it means making the best use of water in river basins irrespective of self-declared sectoral or administrative mandates. So in many ways, it's about the integrated part of water resource management that struggles through a purely water lens. And so it's really about understanding how water is used for agriculture or for energy generation, as much as it is for environmental needs and domestic needs. And through looking at it in these different lenses, it allows you to stimulate the search with stakeholders for what new pathways may exist for water management and water governance that can produce value from water management, and it also empowers those with little voice in decision making. For example, going back to a point from Jethro earlier on, small-scale fisheries, for example, in particular in this part of the world where freshwater fish and access to the river is critically important for local people. This way of looking at water resources encourages a look at, if you like, from an agricultural perspective, the off-farm livelihood needs, not just those that can be grown in the field, but how people access protein in rural environments. But also in this part of the world, there is deep interest in irrigation, and therefore with irrigation, the need for increased storage of water resources. And there's also a large number of dams in this part of the world built for multiple purposes: energy, irrigation, transport, and for environmental flow management and releases. Given we're talking about a very hydrologically diverse set of river systems that have very, very high flows to low flows as well. So the three S rivers, they merge just upstream of where they join the main Mekong River, which is towards the bottom of that map on the screen. And when they combine, form the Mekong's largest single tributary basin of about 78,500 kilometers squared. They're all transboundary. Each of the rivers is transboundary, and there's about 4 million people living in the basin, 80% of which live in Vietnam. While often these are referred to as a single unit, the three S's, the three rivers are actually physically, socially, and economically quite diverse. The Mekong is the least developed in terms of population, and it has commercial agriculture and hydropower in it, but not so much. It has the highest proportion of ethnic minorities, has the largest remaining area of forest, and it has the largest number of endemic fish species. And fish species in this part of the world are deeply important because they have huge migratory pathways, and ultimately the river flows from the Mekong fill up each year the Tonle Sap Lake, which is just at the bottom of this map. You can't see it, which is the second most productive inland fisheries after the Amazon in the world, and produces about $3.5 billion of fish each year based on local economic prices. So migratory fish are really, really important in this part of the world. Covering about 10% then of the overall Mekong, these three rivers provide about 20% of the mean annual flow of the overall Mekong, which is about 35% of that in the dry season. And they're also really important for suspended sediment flows downstream, because ultimately these reach the coast of Cambodia and maintain the stability of the delta downstream. I won't talk any more about the basin, but I want to reiterate something that was raised in the earlier slide, was that whilst we look at these four different levels, local, national, regional, global, the fundamental goals here as well around cooperative and peaceful relationships are also about resilient and healthy ecosystems, because people don't want to cooperate on degraded basins because there's nothing that they can harness and maximize that. And purely degraded basins suggest that there's been a lack of management, a lack of good governance, and a lack of financing. So resilient and healthy ecosystems are really fundamental to both drive cooperation, but also for a key element for cooperation to help solve. At the same time, human well-being and sustainable use is key. Let's not forget, whilst these are big basins and some are sparsely populated, there's still 4 million people in these basins who need access to freshwater systems for a variety of different needs. So, without going into huge details on Nexus assessments, because this has taken quite a large amount of time and mapping to develop. This map is designed to show some of the nexus and non-nexus opportunities in the basin. Nexus being on the left with NS in front, and non-nexus on the right with NNS in front. But in practice, we need a combination of both nexus and non-nexus solutions, i.e. solutions that address multi-sectoral needs, water, energy, food, and solutions that might be designed to address one sector need. For example, hydromet stations there, they allow for the improvement of river management for all sectors. So whilst they are generally funded and managed by water management agencies and meteorological services, they have fundamental value to almost, if not all, water users, including broader climate needs and climate meteorological forecasting. So whilst they are singular in purpose, they benefit many, many, many other sectors. So from a strategic opportunity level, looking at water, energy, food between and flows between Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, we were able to identify strategic opportunities between the states. For example, strategic energy and river basin planning from Laos could save it $2.5 billion by 2030 by adding a small amount of energy generation. Now, that could be small-scale hydropower, it could be other options for renewable energy production. But by investing in its own shores for energy production, it would save money and reduce pressure on transboundary trade of energy between the other countries. Benefit sharing between the countries also is key. Vietnam, for example, plans to substantially increase hydroelectricity production from Laos, even though Laos doesn't have enough of that production capacity available. So understanding a little bit more about the energy demands between states allows us to understand the impact on freshwater systems, and therefore how joint planning at the higher level between states is needed on the water, energy, food needs. Nexus solutions also help save money. These hydrometeorological stations, again, developing networks upstream of existing dam cascades, so not just having these purely for dam and hydropower development, but having hydrometeorological stations across the basin help with planning across sectors. They help with improved licensing, they help with data flow and data sharing between countries. And this benefits the health and state of governance for all three of the states involved. That there are many no-regret options available, but they're often not considered from a purely water management perspective. For example, something called monkey cheeks, which are the use of floodplain land for agricultural needs in the dry season after flooding. So flood recession agriculture can be deeply productive in parts of Cambodia, but is often not recognized as a viable option because farmers get driven down a track of rice farming, which itself can become a poverty trap for many of them. Whereas there are actually a range of more diverse options that could be followed, and the land is available, and there are possibilities to use that. And so there's certainly trials and pilots going on in that part of the world right now to look at how flood recession agriculture can be used to diversify cropping. That there is a need to distribute benefits between the states. For example, improving capture fisheries is a viable option versus reservoir and aquaculture. So one example, or one argument for building more dams is to create aquaculture farms. However, it's known that this also has challenges with respect to water quality, both downstream from the dam, but also water quality in the dam for fish to thrive. The Mekong has a variety of species which need a certain type of water quality, and actually investing in improving capture fisheries with local people and growing local businesses to improve that type of capture fisheries, so improving upon the natural method of fishing rather than creating an aquaculture farm, is potentially more productive and more natural to the system, and therefore helps improve the overall health of the system, keeping migratory fish pathways, keeping sediment moving, and that those nexus and non-nexus solutions can be very complementary. For example, a groundwater recharge and allowing groundwater recharge opens up opportunities for pumping in the dry season in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, which allows for diversification of crops. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So this table demonstrates a summary of a nexus assessment. So at the top of the table, solutions are being identified for the 3S rivers between the three countries, focusing on the top multipurpose dams and new operating rules for existing infrastructure, down to number 7 at the bottom, national infrastructure, other, meaning a variety of different diverse activities that we're not categorized into, one or the other, for example. The threat, therefore, in the three basins, 1 to 9, starting with overpumping, groundwater irrigation, all the way down to deforestation. And then these were assessed against the geography, the information available in the three basins, and the nexus solutions. And you'll see, therefore, that they are prioritized. How many solutions can be applied to solve that threat, and which ones are they, so that we can understand what's possibly available. There may be a number of solutions available to solve overpumping for irrigation, and it could be a combination of different solutions as per the top of the table. And what this demonstrates is that whilst the nexus provides opportunities, there are also risks. It's very easy to quantify energy benefits from a hydropower installation to quantifying the benefits from capture fisheries. And so often this might lead us down a more familiar decision tree to come up with a solution, recognizing that we don't have the data. But this, we've realized with the Nexus approach, certainly in a transboundary situation, shouldn't stop you from considering other options. Some states will have more information and will be more inclined to make a particular decision than other states, in particular that upstream-downstream relationship. And therefore, being informed and having the right knowledge available is really, really key between countries. That, in this case, political economy and the shape of the broader dialogue at the state level can often drive investment decisions, not the economics behind them. And I think it comes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier on to Tendai, in the sense that there are often decisions made that are politically astute and politically wanted, but they may not be qualifiable in terms of the data available or the real case economic argument. And so from a transboundary governance perspective, being as informed as you can be is really, really important. To move from that sort of construction of a political argument into a more strategic and well thought through decision over why this is the best thing to do. For example, broader electricity generation of benefits across the overall basin, which could provide an engine for economic sharing between countries and a financing mechanism. And that in almost all cases between these three countries, the poorest do suffer from the negative externalities of this decision making. And then, of course, we have to try and solve those problems further. And it's actually those ethnic minorities in these three basins that particularly struggle to participate in a new type of economy, which might be dominated more by bigger infrastructure and big decision making that affects very more concretely their local level decisions and local level livelihoods. One example that this brings from being in an economically informed position is that in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, by looking to convert about 15,000 hectares of coffee, which is very regularly drought prone and often not the greatest quality at times, by converting that into a range of different crops, avocado, peppers, durian fruit, so crops that are grown locally, and allows you to diversify how you grow coffee into shade coffee, it rejuvenates the remaining coffee through soil health improvements and intercropping. And over 10 years, with an estimated total investment of about $160 million over 10 years, this could improve the crop value factor by could improve the total crop value by a factor of 3.6. So this takes us from $1.2 billion in crop value from the Central Highlands of Vietnam to $4.3 billion in crop value based on this decision to switch 15,000 hectares. So obviously this is speculative, this is conceptual, this is based on real data and real analysis, including with experts in the coffee growing area of central Vietnam. But what it does is that by increasing production of coffee, you maintain their level of production as it stands, but it diversifies how you use the land and how you use the water. And what this does is it reduces dry season water use by about 40%. And this saves a huge amount of water. And why this is important is that as this water flows from Vietnam downstream into Cambodia, the dry season rainfall in Cambodia is expected to be, by 2050, due to climate change, between 4 to 20% lower than it is now. So even in the worst case scenario, there will be less rainfall in the best case scenario, there'll be less rainfall in Cambodia. And so improving the effectiveness of agriculture is critical upstream, because it not only improves the state of food security for the basins at large and for transboundary needs, but it also helps improve adaptation to climate change downstream. And this is something that the states are now looking at, understanding and collaborating on further as to how do we better use the resources we have at the broader regional level. My last slide for this case study is between these three countries, there are a range of options that allow them to reduce threats, to trade in the resources that water allows us to create, such as energy generation. It allows us to protect the natural system, and it allows threat reduction lower downstream, both at the delta level and from a climate change perspective. So in this particular case, working the three S's and using a very technical entry point of a Nexus assessment has allowed us to understand and identify possible solutions for the states to consider going forward, and to think beyond just their own food and energy security, but to think much larger across the entire 3S basins as to how they can, under increasing pressure from climate pressures, trade better in this area between the resources that they have. So I'll stop there and go to questions. I have just one quick slide after this, but let's do questions.
Thank you so much, James. Your presentation in my mind raised one big question, which I will wait until the end, because we have something from the field which I also think it's very important to raise. Catherine, I'm going to unmute you now, and then you can ask your question to James. And if anybody else has further questions or interventions to make, please use the question box or raise your hands. Thank you. Catherine, you're muted.
Thank you, James. I'm really enjoying this presentation. Thank you so much. And I hope that this isn't too off topic, but in looking at all the activities and groups that have been benefiting from these dialogues and agreements, it kind of raises the question for me, where are the foundational WASH projects? And if they are not directly benefiting, if you have noticed that the outcomes of these bridge efforts are correlating with any improvements in those traditional water and sanitation goals as well. And if conceptually you expect perhaps to see those two water objectives interconnected and again benefiting from these transboundary efforts. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, good question. Do you want me to address that now, Clara, or do you want to take a few more if there are any?
No, address this one now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's a really good point. So actually, you know, if I think back to the Sixaola and to some of the other basins that we work in South and Central America, quite often the entry point there with communities is in water quality and water for domestic needs. So WASH and a variety of other needs that people require water for domestically, including for animals. And so that's often been the entry point, actually, in communities raising attention over access, poor quality, especially in that part of the world where you've got mining as well, and also in West Africa where you have water quality concerns. So communities do raise that. That is a common entry point. And it's that asks us to start to understand, okay, so who's responsible for regulation of mining? Who's responsible for managing these flows? Who is responsible for governing this part of the system here? And from there, taking that into a broader discussion at the basin level. So that applies in both transboundary and in national context as well, Catherine. So you're dead right to raise WASH. It's certainly in the Bridge program. It's just I haven't particularly highlighted this time. It's something that actually we should be doing more on. Partly because our work right now in Lake Titicaca is very dominated by these amazing women's groups who monitor water quality in the lake. Because those communities and municipalities around the lake are heavily dependent upon it, they're also very concerned over water quality based on a whole variety of different runoff into it. And so they do, Bridge helps them with arranging workshops and events and the governance of those groups. And they're incredibly powerful. A lot of them, locally relevant and local leaders who come together to monitor water quality using equipment. In fact, there's some great work there where they've been using drones to monitor things going on in the lake, to start recording it and reporting it to the authorities. And I think, I think this is a really important point, because one of the things of working in transboundary governance or water governance just nationally is that many of these issues become identified and therefore potentially solvable through projects. But when we're creating new institutions or frameworks or charters or MOUs between countries and enhancing that level of cooperation, there's also a need for accountable governance, because I think it goes back to my point at the beginning that effective water management is not just about setting in place policies and plans, but it's also about monitoring it, tailoring it, tweaking it, adjusting it, updating it, and being accountable for delivery of it. And I certainly think with WASH, that's something around accountable governance for WASH that needs increasing attention. And linked to that, of course, is the just serious global lack of attention paid to water quality. So it's a really good point, Catherine, and I'll sort of take it on the nose that I didn't mention WASH enough.
Thank you very much for addressing.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for the question, and James for your contribution to the answer. I have two raised hands, one from Jethro again from the University of Venda, and then one from Kraposi. So Kraposi, I'm gonna let you speak first because you haven't had a chance. I'm gonna mute you, and then I'm gonna pass to Jethro. Thank you, Kraposi. The floor is yours. Can you hear us? Can you talk? Is your microphone okay? Kraposi? Okay. Maybe there are troubles with the microphone. Let me go back to Jethro then. Jethro, you had a hand raised.
Okay, thank you so much for the interesting presentation. I have two issues. One is a comment and the other one is a question. The question could be, given the interest and the complexity of this relationship around water, energy and food nexus, what are some of the current or robust models that we can apply to handle such issues, so that we can communicate with the relevant authorities, so that agency and more informed decisions are made? The other comment which I had was is from the issue that was raised by Tendai about sustainability in the case that the project or the initial funders of the project were excluded. I think my experience is like where you work with government officials, for instance, Ministry of Water, Agriculture, it depends on how the different countries are they configure it. If you work closely with them and closely with the communities, even when the funding has pulled out, these people have been given capacity to carry on with the projects. So basically, where there is there's some synergy, chances that they may be a bit more sustainable. Thank you. But my question is just about the model that we can, the available current model that we can use to handle such dynamics and see the relationship. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jethro. I think on the models, yeah, it's not such an easy thing to answer because there are actually quite a few out there. Some of them get very intense on data needs and can become very academic. There's one called, and you'll have to forgive me, I think it's called MUSIASM, which is developed by a Spanish university in conjunction with FAO, the UN FAO. And FAO has done some work on the Nexus, and so I think that will be probably one of the ones that's most comprehensive. That does that comes from an energy and carbon entry point, though, and then has incorporated land, soil, water into it. There are a few others around. There's work by at the university, work in the American University, or a guy based at the American University in Beirut now. And so he's done an awful lot of him, and I'm sorry, I know him really well, but for right now his name just slipped my mind. And he has worked a lot on Nexus models along with students at the Florida State University, and they've developed a lot of work in this area. GIZ has done some work on the Nexus, not necessarily modeling, but has done assessment work, as has UNECE. If you look at UNECE assessment work on the Nexus, they've done Nexus assessments in Central Asia. Again, not necessarily following a model, although they did work with a group called KTH, which are based in Sweden, again, from an energy modeling perspective, because I think energy modeling is much more common than looking at water, energy, food modeling combined. So energy is the basic platform for this. And then we have used Nexus assessments, which have not necessarily relied on models. What they've done is they've just looked at collecting our range of data and understanding and building on models that might be present already in river basins, and collated that using a framework of a Nexus assessment. And then from there, use that to develop, for example, the maps that I presented. So it's not such an easy thing to answer to say there's one golden Nexus model. I think it takes a little bit more research to figure out what exactly data do you have and what's your real interests to understand what will be the right methodology to apply. So I can't give you a straight answer to that one.
Yeah, but you've given interesting pointers for Jethro to sort of follow up on. So thank you for that. I mean, in many ways, you're right. That, you know, modeling it's very useful, but it can hardly ever be applied as is to any different situation. You always have to look at what is the reality that you're trying to describe, and then try to best apply what you have and see how it can give you the kind of information and knowledge that you want to. I don't see any other questions from the public. So can
I've got one more slide.
Yeah. You got one more slide. So go ahead. Go ahead with your slide, and then.
Okay. Okay. So just three really takeaway messages, if you like, from just what I presented today. So it certainly doesn't encompass our full Transboundary range of work, but just to point out that this approach of multi-level, of different stakeholders at different levels is really, really important, because it allows those at the lower level to understand and mobilize these national level decision frameworks and agreements that are in place. But it also means that they can demonstrate that local water management set of skills that are required. So we're using stakeholders that are not water managers to implement transboundary agreements, which is really, really important from a governance perspective. It not only that, but it can help to mobilize armies of people and communities and low and small businesses to help support improved water management, and that can only be a good thing. That by identifying infrastructure and development projects that have the best range of options and benefits for a really diverse range of stakeholders helps to attract in different levels of discussions on financing. And that's increasingly important for transboundary institutions. It's no surprise that Tendai raised this question on transboundary financing, because it's really, really key right now is that there is just a lack of financing flowing into transboundary basin governance. And this is really, really important to look at what can be possible that's not just project-based financing. But so I think this is really important. Jethro's point about how these projects do build capacity and therefore this needs to be mobilized is really important, because it's the strength of the institution that needs to empower its people to work on transboundary governance that's really needed. And for that, they need resourcing, not just with cash, if you like, but also with the ability to negotiate and have access to data and to understand the political decision-making processes between countries. And in this particular case, with one of these examples, that this water, energy and food nexus thinking for the entirety of a river basin is really, really important. Looking at it from just one particular project perspective is fine, but looking at it more broadly across the river basin helps to identify those big trade-off issues that are likely to hit you in 30 years' time when you didn't expect it, and also identify, therefore, what are the solutions to this that we can mobilize now across borders to try and, for example, strengthening frameworks or agreements for flow management to support water governance and management. Many transboundary institutions, where they exist, were created, in particular, actually in Africa, were created around hydropower development to manage and protect the resource, to maintain the security of that asset, but to also maintain and protect flow regimes between states that were agreed. Now, sometimes those flow regimes do not always follow the agreements due to increasing competition and increasing needs for energy, plus climate change. But I think the more that we can understand, therefore, the future demands on water resources, the better those agreements can be strengthened and become more dynamic agreements as to what's the flow required on a more annual 2-3 year basis. And actually, if you look at countries which have got strong water governance, they are increasingly looking at more adaptable and flexible operating arrangements for extraction of water resources in line with the impacts of climate change and increasing competition of water resources. And that's what I think the Nexus allows brings to a transboundary discussion. But again, it requires a certain level of education of the people involved and a certain level of enhancement of data sharing and knowledge between sectors nationally, never mind internationally. But if you want to find out more information on these case studies, please do. You can download these attachments. There's things available online, and if that doesn't satisfy your curiosity, then please just drop me an email, and we'd be happy to respond. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, for these closing remarks, which I think are very, very important to keep in mind as we close the discussion today, but also prepare for the last section next week, in which we're going to talk about the nexus between data and water management in Southern Africa, really, and we're going to look at it from a sort of pragmatic perspective on what is required in terms of data collection, but also what is required for data sharing as a commodity, pretty much trading off between countries. And we're going to talk about it with different stakeholders, including the Limpopo River Basin Commission, the LIMCOM, the so that we can also look at it from the regional governance of Transboundary Basin perspective. Before we have a final discussion, I have a question from Rodolfo from the Sustainable Water Partnership. Rodolfo, I'm going to mute you now, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. James, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Rodolfo. Yeah.
Okay. Very nice. Enjoy really the presentations on Transboundary case studies. One question that I have regarding based on what you have seen, what would be, I mean, I know there are different institutional structures to look at transboundary management, and sometimes there are just agreements. And some might be more sophisticated where you set up binational institution or something like that. But the question that I have is, sometimes it's very difficult to follow up on data sharing, dissemination of information without having a kind of a permanent secretariat somewhere. And of course, this is challenging sometimes because you have countries, it's very difficult to find a multilateral institution where you fund all its size, etc. But what is your views with regards to the institutionality of these transboundary basins where one or two countries belong to, but without really some sort of a permanent secretariat? It's very difficult to follow up with dissemination, joint monitoring, you know, get the flow of activities, you know, the plans for the countries involved, etc. What's your view about that? The different levels?
Sure. Yeah, you were fading in and out a bit there, Rodolfo, but I think I got it. I think where you've got institutions already, the key is to build upon them and work with them and strengthen them, because they may have been there quite some time and they've seen the history of the basin develop. So they become very, very important in that sense. Where you haven't got such formal institutions, and in particular in many basins, many of the sort of smaller to medium-sized transboundary river basins, this may be slightly controversial, but I think there may not be the need for the type of transboundary institution, whatever it may be, commission, etc., that you have in other basins. And I say that because if you have, depending on the level of development and the level of resources available, if you have a dynamic private sector, if you have good working public institutions, if you have solid municipalities, there are ways that if national level agreements between countries can be implemented through other actors, then that might also be a possible viable option going forward. There may not be the need to have all of the formalities for certain basins where you've already got good functioning institutions. And to me, that brings the strength of different perspectives from different sectors. It also brings the strength of effectively having water management delivered through others, which is desperately needed because there's not enough water managers around really to deal with the challenges that water has. And it also may therefore be more cost effective because it allows the resources and skills of other sectors to be mobilized without needing to build formal institutions, which then both struggle to maintain resources and become very static in their approach and their way, and do not necessarily move, if you like, with the needs of the basin. So I think where institutions exist, they must be supported, and where there's a need for some institutions in some basins, for sure, then they need to be created. But in some situations, there are possibly alternative options available for how you would go around improving transboundary cooperation and economic development in those basins.
So it pretty much depends on size too. I mean, I recall on the case study that on Titicaca there is a permanent commission, correct?
That's right, the ALT, yeah, the Lake Titicaca Authority, yeah.
That's more of an institution that is funded by the two countries, Bolivia.
That's right. And I think many of these basins, as I said before, you know, they come about from a sort of asset protection, security, and flow management. In this particular case, ALT was really about understanding the hydrology of the basin and maintaining an understanding of the lake levels. And the reason that the countries fell out over the lake and there wasn't great cooperation is because the lake levels couldn't be agreed between the two countries' hydrologists. And until they had collaborated in a way of a sort of level of technical diplomacy to agree on the method for determining the volume of the lake, so they could then agree on the level of the lake, they couldn't move forward in the discussions. And it was that opened up the door for us to work further with them on other things, was one, agreeing to that methodology and getting the countries to come together, and then they came back for other things. So in that case, big basin with historical challenges of cooperation. And so absolutely, I think the bigger the basin, the more complex, the more you need institutions that can handle that complexity. But where you have smaller to medium-sized basins that have already reasonably good agreements across the border for trade and movement of people, navigation, whatever it may be, that may be where you don't need such a formal set of institutions.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Rodolfo, for the question, and James for your comments on it. I think it's very important to always, again, understand the political and as much as the environmental environment in which you operate before you make decisions on intervention. I just have, I'm going to make it very brief, James, but mine was more of a question on perspective. You have 20 years of experience in water governance and water management, and now with a UCN working directly with supporting transboundary water governance initiatives. There's something that you said earlier on that really struck a chord for me, which is that the fact that you have to justify why water matter, which pretty much should be self-explanatory. And I find it very much the case, not just for water, but for many natural resources. I mean, I work and operate mostly in Southern Africa, so that's where I speak from. That when you're going for funding from governments, so direct funding from government into their own national resources, or from donor funding that want to help a country or a group of countries develop a specific program around sustainability, sustainable development, it's always difficult to justify. You kind of almost have to justify the sustainable natural resource management component of natural resources, because there's so many other interests that kind of take precedence. But also, it seems to me, again, from what you carried on saying in terms of your different case studies, that we are dealing mostly with countries where the management of natural resources on paper can be integrated, can be sustainable, can be, you know, identify whatever adjective you want to put to it that indicates a long-term process and a long-term understanding. But mostly, it seems to me, and I want to know your perspective from the water sector, that it's often run into a crisis management. So it's difficult to go in and say, well, look, you know, like you said earlier for the Laos-Vietnam situation, if you have these changes in the land uses, if you have this change in your approach to land use planning, for instance, already you can give such contribution to water and economic development and natural resource management. But you kind of have to sell it, whereas it should be almost assumed now by government with all the international agreements, international conventions, international agendas, that you know, if you look at it from a longer term perspective, yes, you have to take that leap of faith and change the way you operate as government, but it will sort of play out in a proper way. But there is resistance to that. So do you find that in most of the basins that you're working with, or there are cases in which you find a welcoming scenario whereby whatever subscription governments have to international agenda for sustainability, it's very much reflected into the operation of water and water management?
I think I wouldn't say it's always difficult. I think that there are examples where countries are really keen on improving water resource management in a transboundary context or nationally, and actually I think some of that is dependent on a couple of things. I think you can see, you know, if you go to if you look at the national press in countries, you can see how much the management of natural resources is raised and therefore drives the national discourse. For example, you know, concerns over illegal river mining or concerns over water pollution or availability of water, compared to those news and media stories which would tend to be about the extraction of natural resources, more removal of forest cover or whatever it may be. And I think that tends to therefore shape the national psyche around water resources. And I think countries that have big river systems and they have to deal with the challenges that brings, especially from a destructive perspective, floods and droughts, for example, is the easiest way to look at it, then that brings both a cost and a crisis to the country, a crisis to manage and solve and a cost to solve or a cost to, to sort of avoid. So I think that changes the national psyche. So countries where that's more common and the media is more attuned to and society is more attuned to preserving and protecting, makes it easier to engage, absolutely, for sure. However, it's never easy. It's always about justifying why this is important and allowing people to understand why something that happens a long way upstream, for example, is really important to them, or a long way downstream is as a consequence of them. So I think that's the problem with water, is that unless you're standing in front of a flood coming at you, the use and abuse of it means that the negative impacts, are not immediate on stakeholders. They'll find out later on, and there's technology available to help us solve that. But a lot of people are not fully aware of the implications of bad water management or the opportunities that good water management can bring. So I think there are major challenges still. And let's not forget that the natural environment has a huge carrying capacity for abuse, right? We're very good at, if you like, abusing the natural system and not seeing a consequence of that, because the natural system can really soak that up. It's used to dealing with change as part of a sort of geographic processes and climate processes. But when we put ourselves in that mix and we change things, then we immediately start to see ourselves a bit more as causing that risk is really important. Flooding being a good one, putting houses in floodplains and then not expecting them to flood is a really good example of us just not really understanding. And regulation is there to prevent that, but then planning takes over and says, yes, but we need the housing. So I think solving those problems and really making it tangible for people is key. And that's determined. I'm increasingly of the perspective that it's about the national psyche around water and natural resources more broadly.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that contribution. It's very valuable, and it helps also to better frame for me the context of other natural resources that we have in the region besides water, or thanks to water rather. So, Tariro, I thought you had a hand up. Would you like to make a final comment on this discussion before we close? I'm going to mute you now. Tariro?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Yes, thanks for the presentation, James. I just want to come on that last comment that James was giving. I think he's already kind of given out the crux of the matter. Just to emphasize, from experience, when you ask why at a national level you don't actually get the kind of political attention or seriousness that you think government should be giving to issues that have things to do, with natural resources, including water, including wildlife, whatever. I think most of the time, what you realize in a typical government setup is that the department at cabinet level, the department that deals with issues like water, like environment, like climate change, the minister or the secretary who's given that department is the least powerful. Why? Because when you look at environmental issues, they do not directly speak to votes, so they don't become priorities to politicians. At least this is what I kind of discovered when I look at areas where we've been working on in Africa. I hope there are government people still on the platform listening, and I would like them to disagree with me where they can. But this is what you find out normally. I saw that no matter how much the people in that department are very aware of what needs to be done, are very committed, they do not have the kind of push at a political level that you'd desire, that you would expect from them. So, but until such issues becomes very important, or where a crisis arises, then you get all the attention. If there's an environmental crisis that actually risks votes to the politicians, you get that attention overnight. If you get a huge cyclone, a lot of poor people now are saying the government is not doing anything. If you get, especially towards elections, if you get service delivery issues because of something to do with the water resources, you quickly get that attention. But the moment that crisis is over, then again you go back to the default mode. So you don't get all the commitments, you don't get the government actually putting aside in its national budgeting structure that it does every year. You don't ever get them giving the kind of resources, that would adequately address environmental issues. And that link between the environment and the security of the population in terms of livelihood, in terms of food security, is, you normally find out that is not clearly understood by everyone, and is kind of always responded to as an emergency almost all the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teriro. Yes, what you said made me think that sometimes I wish we could go straight to the disaster management section of governments, really, to discuss a long-term plan for natural resource management in these countries, as opposed to really just tackling from an environmental perspective. It might get a lot more traction. James, I see you nodding. Do you agree with Teriro's comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, there is a real absence, I think, globally, and it's an increasing conversation that there's a real absence of water leadership more broadly across governments. That's not at those people working hard to improve water management, but there's just a real absence of leadership at the top of the sort of political elites in really understanding the role of water as a key resource strategically, ethically, in terms of being able to cope with climate change going forward. And I think because it's so valuable, we don't see the value of it. And I think that's one of the main problems. And so there is a real call for improved leadership on water across countries and across at political elite levels, because I think political will is one thing, but what we really need to see now is political action on water, and that's what's missing.
Thank you very much, James. Do you have a last comment or remark before we close the session for today?
I think two things really stood out for me based on the questions and just some of the things I was thinking as I was talking. Is one, that really transboundary governance is about empowerment of stakeholders across different scales, and that's really, really key. Otherwise, you end up with this water management that's ineffective, good on paper but ineffective in action. So empowerment, and I think therefore that allows you to make transboundary governance real. It's about how people, institutions connect with water through how water is both used and abused. And I think you only really see that tangibly when you understand that water is used to generate electricity. Water is there to grow our food. Water is what our food lives in. And until that's properly understood, I think we see water as a little bit abstract. And it goes back to really what I just said, that political will is one thing, but we really need political action to move water management into a more realistic operational framework. And a large part of that is about mobilizing resources, which is obviously a key part of the questions on resources that people brought up today. So no, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing to life case studies around transboundary water governance. We've heard a lot of the legal frameworks in the first two sessions. We heard about idle diplomacy with Diego. We heard about an example from South America with Emilio, Rebecca, and Maria Laura. And then last week about Southern Africa with Teriro. And today we close with a global view of different issues and solutions for transboundary water governance through the work of IUCN and its partners. I would like to remind you that the closing session for this seminar is next week, and we're preparing a roundtable discussion with people from Southern Africa. So we would like to invite, well, we have invited the government of South Africa, who is part of our reference group for the Big Data and Transboundary Water collaboration for Southern Africa. We've invited the Limpopo River Commission. So for anybody that has further questions on the feasibility, effectiveness, and sustainability of river basin institutions, next week will be a good time to ask. We will have other experts in big data and data analytics, because what we would like to really explore is, having spoken so much about governance and effective management, how can data contribute to good and sound decision making, and having that really bird's eye picture of how water is important, not just for conservation, not just for electricity, not just for food security, but for everything that is pertaining to life on this planet. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you very much once again, James, for your time in preparation and your time today. I wish you all a wonderful day further. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.